The Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the Department of Homeland Security's contractor fitness requirements, vetting process, and reciprocity of fitness examinations between components. The Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. DHS relies on thousands of contractor employees every day to achieve its mission. From IT services to construction and janitorial services, DHS and contractor employees work hand in hand to secure our nation. Given DHS's daunting task of securing our nation's borders, airports, and much, much more, it is of the utmost importance that everyone working for DHS, be it a federal employee or contractor employee, is appropriately vetted to ensure that he or she will uphold the integrity of the department. However, I am concerned that DHS's process to vet the character and conduct of contractor employees, known as a fitness determination, is bureaucratic in the worst ways, inefficient, inconsistent, and lacking transparency. The Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, sets minimum fitness standards for all contractor employees in the federal government. However, DHS components apply those standards differently based on the nature of each position. This causes difficulties for contractors with employees providing services to multiple DHS components. For example, if a contractor employee who has received a favorable fitness determination from the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, is tasked to perform work on a separate contract for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, the CBP may not reciprocally accept TSA's fitness adjudication. Therefore, the contractor employee must undergo an additional fitness determination specific to CBP standards. Differing applications of fitness standards causes headaches due to lost time, increased costs, and inefficient communication between DHS and industry. Often, industry representatives are left in the dark and are unaware of how a particular DHS component will apply fitness standards and when vetting contractor employees. This makes it difficult for industry to know if their current personnel meet the qualifications to earn a favorable fitness determination for a specific component, or how to seek out employees who could qualify. Moreover, any time spent waiting for work to begin while a fitness determination or preliminary check is being conducted is a cost industry must bear, which in turn increases the price to DHS. Delayed fitness determinations not only waste taxpayer dollars, but also keep contractor employees from providing DHS with much-needed services. And oftentimes, I would add the most appropriate personnel. Additionally, communication between DHS and industry during this process is inefficient. In order for industry to receive information on the status of a pending fitness determination, industry must place the request with the contracting officer, representative, or COR, who then forwards the request to the office conducting the review. The office conducting the review then provides the requested information to the COR, who in turn gives it to industry, who asked in the first place. This not only creates an unnecessary middleman, but also places a burden on industry's relationship with the COR, whose main job is to manage the contract and provide technical direction to industry. Aside from the complications I just detailed, I am also concerned that this convoluted process deters non-traditional government partners from wanting to do business with DHS. Why would a company, large or small, choose to involve itself in such a disparate and confusing process that directly impacts their personnel and bottom line? With the ever-increasing threat environment we face today, DHS should work with both traditional and non-traditional government partners to ensure that robust market competition provides the best services and technology at a competitive price. I want to reiterate that I support DHS's need to appropriately vet its contractor workforce that supports a variety of missions. However, there should be a more transparent and efficient way to do so. Other agencies actually use better and more efficient ways. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses regarding their experiences with fitness determinations and any suggestions they may have to improve the current process at DHS. The Chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, for his statement.
Thank you, Chairman Perry, for holding this most important hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. As you know, the federal government is one of the world's largest marketplaces, In fiscal year 2017, DHS service contractors reported more than 54,000 full-time employees employed under the DHS contracts. Given the vast nature of the DHS mission, the Department must also use contractors throughout the components to fulfill its critical needs. With vacancies in the Trump administration at such a high level, DHS would have transparent, practical policies designed to get contractors on board as quickly as possible. Contracting companies have indicated that DHS is not transparent with its fitness standards, hindering the firm's abilities to understand the personnel needs of DHS. Companies have also indicated that fitness standards vary across DHS components or agencies, precluding reciprocities of favorable fitness assessments when a contractor joins a contract with a different DHS component. These areas require proper oversight and management and can do better by eliminating redundancies in the fitness adjudication process and setting up consistent criteria department-wide and effective communication with contractor employers. Unfortunately, these administrative remedies appear to have fallen low on the department's priority list. At a time when DHS resources are already spread thin, effective use of taxpayer dollars should be centered on ways the department can operate and fulfill its mission in the most suitable, efficient manner. Contractors are an important piece of our mission. My district is home to several companies with contract work at DHS, especially small businesses with information technology in the service area. I look forward to speaking with witnesses today about their interaction with DHS and how we can make this experience a more positive one and how DHS can manage and develop opportunities for small businesses. Again, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing here today. And again, I thank the chairman for this hearing, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today. The witnesses' entire written statements will appear in the record. The Chair will introduce the witnesses first and then recognize each of the witnesses for their testimony. Mr. Charles Allen is the Senior Intelligence Advisor for the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, or INSA. He previously served at DHS as the Assistant Secretary for Information and Analysis from 2005 to 2009 and was the Department's first Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis. Mr. Allen served nearly 50 years in the Central Intelligence Agency before joining DHS. Welcome, sir. Mr. Mark Pearl is the President and CEO of the Homeland Security and Defense Business Council, or HSDBC. The HSDBC brings together industry and government officials to share best practices and perspective on pressing national security issues. Mr. Pearl joined HSBDC in 2008. Thank you, sir. Mr. David Bartow, Berto is the CEO of the Professional Services Council, or PSC. The PSC represents over 400 member companies of all sizes that provide services to the federal government. Prior to joining PSC, Mr. Berto served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics and Material Readiness. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Brandon Labonte, sorry about that, is CEO of Ardent MC. His small business provides technology and geospatial solutions to almost every DHS operational component. Ardent MC has employees in 14 states and the District of Columbia to support its DHS contracts. Welcome, sir. Thank you all for being here today. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Allen for your opening statement, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Correa, members of the subcommittee, for this opportunity to talk about something I think is very important for the Department of Homeland Security. As the Chairman said, I'm Charlie Allen. I served for almost 50 years at the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm here representing the Intelligence and National Security Alliance as its Senior Intelligence Advisor, which is a nonpartisan forum for advancing national security priorities through public-private relationships. Also, I chair the INSA Security Policy Reform Council, which seeks to improve government security policies and programs. Fitness requirements may be needed to screen new hires and contractors who are unknown to the United States government, but I believe they're completely unnecessary for personnel holding security clearances. Moreover, the lack of uniform fitness criteria among DHS components is illogical and counterproductive. Components refuse to accept others' fitness determinations, leads to duplication of effort, lost time, wasted resources, which undermine the department's ability to fulfill its mission. I saw these problems when I was DHS's Chief Intelligence Officer about 10 years ago. They still exist, and I applaud the committee for holding this hearing. Before starting at work on a DHS contract in any capacity, a contractor must receive favorable fitness determination based on a background investigation. But the investigative and adjudicative processes have shortcomings that undermines the department's effectiveness. First, DHS fitness criteria are not consistent across the department. There is no rationale for component-specific criteria. CBP, which intercepts drug traffickers, as you know, argues that anyone involved in drug trafficking is unfit to work for CBP. But I would argue that a drug trafficker would not be fit to work for any component, whether it's TSA or FEMA. Second, the lack of uniform criteria prevents reciprocity among components. Contractors supporting multiple DHS components must therefore be assessed multiple times, which is a waste of time and resources. Third, fitness assessments of contractors who hold security clearances are a complete waste of time and resources, particularly since clearance investigations are far more comprehensive. I was just reinvestigated by the Department of Defense, and it took 35 months for me to be upgraded again to receive top secret SCI information. But it is a real problem. Contractors are harmed by an inefficient process that wastes time and money and impedes their work. First, lengthy fitness investigations make it difficult for firms to fulfill their contracts. Contractors routinely wait 3 or 4 months for a fitness determination. Second, firms incur substantial costs when staff wait for fitness determinations. Using an average figures provided by one large firm consulted by INSA, a company would lose $27,000 in revenue for each employee who waits 30 business days for a fitness determination. On a 50-person contract, which is ordinary, the firm could lose over $1 million in revenue. Third, fitness requirements deter firms from bidding on DHS contracts. I've had a number of companies, particularly small firms, cannot weather the delays or incur additional costs. The impact on government is manifest. These inefficiencies undermine the department's effectiveness. By impeding contractors' work, the fitness process hinders DHS's ability to execute its missions. Lost revenue increases firms' cost, which result in less value for the government. DHS wastes time and money investigating people unnecessarily. Recommendations. What should we do about this? First, DHS should eliminate fitness requirements for contractors who are already cleared, who hold security clearances, secret or top secret SCI. Second, DHS should set uniform fitness criteria across the department. Consistent standards are a prerequisite for reciprocity. Last January, the House passed this committee's DHS Clearances Management and Administration Act, H.R. 697, which requires DHS to set uniform clearance adjudication standards. DHS should take the same steps regarding fitness standards. The committee should direct it to do so. Third, DHS should mandate and implement fitness reciprocity across all components. Fourth, a single DHS entity, preferably the Chief Security Officer, with whom I worked closely at the time when I was at the department, should set department-wide standards for all fitness determinations. Fifth, Congress should rescind the TSA-specific fitness requirements, which has been enshrined in law. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, for testifying today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pearl for his opening statement.
Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Correa, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide the collective perspective from what we call the Homeland Security industrial base. The issues surrounding fitness adjudication have frustrated industry and program heads at DHS since the department's inception 15 years ago this Thursday. All companies, regardless of size or capability, are affected. Despite numerous forums that the Council and our members have participated in to bring greater attention to the issue, we have yet to see any improvement in communication or a more efficient process. As my written testimony outlines more fully, the current processes at DHS lack consistency and transparency, the same thing that both of you opened up with. Take too long, limit competition, increase labor rates, and are costly to both government and industry. As a result, the department is prevented from obtaining the best workforce and from having mission-critical contracts executed in a timely manner. We do believe that these changes can be made that would ensure the integrity of the program and reduce the pain points for everyone. There are numerous challenges facing industry with respect to the fitness determination process at DHS. Let me just briefly discuss two. There is not a single standard for fitness across DHS. In addition to 8 types of conduct that may be incompatible with the duties of a position, each component is also given sole discretion in applying 7 additional considerations. Each component also has its own personnel security office with different standards, different procedures, and different adjudicators to determine what is acceptable. While such differences may be justified in some instances, specific policies and standards are not communicated to industry and are inconsistently applied across DHS. The ability to grant fitness reciprocity from another component or other federal agency ensures the saving of time, effort, and cost for both sectors. Reciprocity allows companies to quickly onboard or transfer employees to contracts that best fit their skills and experience. DHS and its components, unlike DoD, rely on equivalent fitness standards to determine reciprocity, which means that candidates who have a high-level security clearance cannot receive reciprocity without additional scrutiny. This is an odd result when the investigation used for a TS-SCI clearance exceeds the investigation standards of, say, a CBP background investigation. The department's different fitness standards also reduces the pool of candidates who can promptly begin work, thereby increasing labor rates and the amount of time between contract award and contractor employees executing a contract. Furthermore, neither the company nor the candidate is informed of the investigation status, what is causing the delay, what is needed to be resolved with regard to problems identified. If a company knows that an individual will be leaving a position in the future, it cannot submit a replacement name for a fitness determination until the seat is empty. And candidates with the best skills and experience often take other positions because they can no longer sit around and wait while the investigation process and the fitness adjudication is going on. In many instances, companies may not find this out until after the adjudication, and they must then start the process all over again. And while our members have instituted internal processes to screen candidates, the uncertainty forces companies to continue to recruit and provide conditional offers of employment for a single position multiple times. As a result, companies will often build time and cost on hiring multiple candidates into their rates and their pricing models before government. So, what can be done? While the Council and our members strongly support the need for DHS to have sufficiently vetted contractors, the delays, inconsistencies, and costs inherent in the current system must be measured against alternative ways to get the same result. Allow me to offer 2 recommendations. Both sectors save time and money when fitness reciprocity, as we've already heard, is available. In the short term, if DHS and its components could work together to standardize, collapse, or even find greater alignment with some of the fitness standards across the department, it would increase opportunities for reciprocity. In the longer term, the federal government needs to continue efforts to standardize background investigations and align them with suitability and fitness so that DHS could base reciprocity on investigative elements rather than fitness requirements. This would open up reciprocity to a much larger class of individuals with security clearances. DHS must also figure out ways, you've said it, Mr. Allen said it, to communicate the status of candidate investigations with industry throughout the process. DOD's electronic personnel security status system, for example, allows a designated person from industry to know the status and delays with candidate investigations. DHS should consider this approach. It would reduce staff workload, improve companies' ability to plan, budget, and hire staff. In conclusion, personal security is a necessity and of utmost importance. But there are ways to improve the process without giving up the integrity of the program. DHS and industry need to continue to work together to reduce the system backlogs and timelines, allow companies to onboard quickly, improve communication, and ensure that DHS has access to quality contractor workforce. We urge Congress to consider the ideas that all of us are putting forward today and play an active role in driving change at DHS and across the federal government. I thank you for the opportunity and to provide the collective perspectives of our members, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, Mr. Pearl. Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes Mr. Bertaw for an opening statement. Can you push the mic, sir? Yeah, the button.
I'm technically incompetent, so I don't know how to push the button that says talk. I want to particularly thank those here from my home state of Louisiana, which I think is what teaches us that you don't need to push a button in order to talk, you just talk. There's a couple things I'd like to say that are not in my written statement, and I appreciate your incorporating the written statement. I don't have it in there, but I should have had it in there, and I think all my fellow panelists would agree with this. We need to recognize that every day there are thousands of people who get up in the Department of Homeland Security and come to work and do the absolute best they can. Some of those people are on the government payroll. Some of those people work for contractors. They do their best to get their jobs done. And I think they deserve a better system to support them. And that's really what I think this committee can do to help. And I think it's important to recognize that. The deck is stacked against them in many cases. I'd like to associate myself with some of the recommendations that have already been made. In my statement, I have a number of recommendations, and I tend to focus on things I think this committee can do. But let me highlight three things that I think are goals that we ought to have in place here. We frequently look at this as a trade-off, right? That if you're going to have a faster process, you're going to actually jeopardize security as part of that. I don't think that's true. In fact, I think the opposite is true. And particularly if you start bringing in the kind of 21st century capability we have of data and analytics and access to the databases that are out there and use this in a continuous evaluation process, you can actually speed the process up, exercise standards that actually make sense and create true reciprocity across the department, and actually increase security in doing that. And I think that's one goal that you should certainly have in place. There's a second goal. The reciprocity is clearly there. Each component inside DHS thinks they've got something they've got to protect. I don't like to compare DHS to DOD because, in fact, that's not a fair comparison. But in this case, I think it's evident. In the Defense Department, they've managed to figure out how to transfer clearances very quickly and easily without any loss to the culture and integrity of any of the components or subcomponents inside the department. There's no reason DHS can't achieve that same objective, I think, going forward. And then third is, and this is where the committee can really help, we just don't have the information we need to have to tell how things are going. So this is true, obviously, for contractors. You described in your opening statement the contractor has to ask the COR has to ask the office has to report back, et cetera. And frequently, there's weeks or even months go by inside that process. There is no reason why you can't have access to data right from the beginning for everybody. The government would be more efficient. The contractors would be more efficient. If it's going to take 12 months for me to get a suitability determination, let me know that. I'll go do something else for 11 and a half months, and then I'll come back when the time is done, and let's get on with it, right? So I think if you put all three of those together, stronger reciprocity, a better, faster system that actually uses innovation to increase security rather than decrease it, and better reporting on the data, you'll go a long way towards making things better.
All right, Mr. Bertaw, thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Labonte for his testimony.
Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Correa, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about my company's support to DHS. My name is Brendan Labonte. I'm the president and owner of Arden MC, a small business that started in 2006 with a primary focus on providing geospatial and technology solutions to the Department of Homeland Security. Much like many small businesses who focus on Homeland Security, Arden MC is driven by a desire to advance the use of tools and technologies in the detection and deterrence of terrorist activities, to help respond and recover to natural and man-made disasters, and to support our law enforcement security efforts around the country. While I'll speak to you today about our company's perspectives in particular, I believe our experiences are representative of small businesses doing work at DHS across the board. In the summer of 2016, I had the privilege of joining representatives from the DHS Procurement Department and the Personnel Security Division for an Acquisition Innovation Roundtable, an AIR, on the contractor fitness process. While fitness determinations are a challenge for both industry and government, the AIR allowed a better understanding of opposing viewpoints. For example, the AIR revealed that DHS seemed unaware that industry was hiring employees on the contingency of them receiving their fitness determination, and that recruiting costs were lost when excessive delays meant a contingent employee might take a job elsewhere. Given the monumental challenge faced by DHS and the ever-increasing volume of fitness requests submitted, I would respectfully submit 3 recommendations to increase the efficiency of the department's fitness efforts and the level of support for the mission. First, DHS components should permit reciprocity of the fitness determinations. We hired an employee that has supported DHS client for over 3 years. We submitted his fitness request on November 4th, 2015, expecting a quick result and good continuity for the program. His fitness was approved, but not until March 3rd, 2017, about 15 months later. In the meantime, he took a job somewhere else rather than wait for the fitness process to clear. While differences in the way some components utilize reciprocity are understandable, our experience is that reciprocity is rarely honored between or even within components. This results in uncertainty for the contractor and fitness delays. Arden MC's average fitness determination time across all our pending contracts as of last week was 213 days. A uniform approach to an already approved contractor employee would increase predictability for contractors and mission support for DHS. Second, DHS should increase industry collaboration and partnership in the fitness process. On February 22nd of this year, I think that was last week, we received an email from a DHS component security office in response to repeated requests for help with a delayed fitness submission, one that we had inquired about monthly since the submission had been put in. The employee, it turns out, had been approved to work, had been granted fitness on June 22nd, 2017. Yet the component did not convey the information and did not have it when we'd asked about it repeatedly. This results in less support to the mission and over $120,000 of lost revenue, not an insignificant amount for a small business. This multiplies when the number of employees impacted increases. Today, unlike DoD, DHS will not communicate with employers about employees submitted for fitness. The result is excessive delays and miscommunication, or in some cases, no communication between both DHS and the employer. DHS should open communication directly to the employers about the status of their employees in consideration for fitness. Finally, DHS should leverage industry's government-approved security officers. Arden MC's corporate security officer, known to many as a facilities security officer or an FSO, works closely with DoD on submitting and monitoring the status of our employees in the security clearance process. In fact, DoD provides the training, the access, the authorization to handle sensitive personnel information across the board. While the security process at DHS is distinct from DoD, the type of information dealt with is the same. Industry provides over 13,000 certified security officers today, all trained and approved to handle the same type of information used in the DHS fitness process through a program called the NISPOM, the National Industrial Security Program. DHS's workforce could be augmented at no cost to the agency while also providing visibility and transparency by utilizing these FSOs to open communications with DHS. As a company that began its mission supporting DHS and has continued to work for DHS for over a decade, we believe we bring some uncommonly deep insight into these challenges, and we certainly understand the need for a secure workforce. We continue to hope to work with DHS and to be part of the solution. Thank you for the opportunity to provide the testimony, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Chair, thanks, Mr. Labonte. and now recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning. And I'll start out with Mr. Allen. Go a little bit off of script here, but I'm just very curious from my standpoint as I looked at this. To me, if you have a TS or TSSCI or even secret clearance, is there anything in the fitness standard that is more adjudicatory, is more in depth than any of those clearances that I've discussed? Because there are different levels of clearance, I understand, but particularly anything above the secret level that you could know of.
No, there isn't, Mr. Chairman. These are really excruciatingly very precise efforts to find out who you are. Even if you've had a top secret SCI, you have to be reinvestigated every 5 years. We're moving to a new standard, I think, as Mr. Betrose stated, about electronic. Today we can check very rapidly everything about you electronically. Your whole life history is in digital dust out there. But the standards are excruciating for those holding the highest clearances, SCI. A leakage of culture has occurred recently in the intelligence community, but it doesn't mean that you have to just sit and study the issue longer. Use better techniques and electronics. But SCI, everything about me is known to the National Background Investigative Bureau, as well as the Defense Security Service. And my wife, they know everything about my wife and my children. So it's very thorough when you get to that top secret SCI, and that's the reason I think it's redundant. I think if you've gone through that and you're within scope, within 5 years for a top secret SCI or a secret within 10 years, I think you're pretty fit to come work for DHS.
I certainly think that even if you, let's just say you had a TSSCI and you were halfway through the term of your TS and you chose to put yourself out, and you're going to be hired, so a simple background check just to update that you hadn't committed any crimes since you were adjudicated for your TSSCI seemed to be, to me, sufficient. And as I thought about it, you know, Mr. Snowden had a clearance, Bradley Manning had a clearance, and these folks were people that ended up being, in my mind, criminals. But that aside, it seems to me the fitness test isn't going to be any more thorough than the top secret or the secret clearance. So my question to you, if you know it, is that does the department and the disparate organizations within the department want to maintain this fitness standard as a vehicle for lack of a better way of putting it? So we've got this individual that we're vetting. He passes all the security. Let's just put it, because I know it doesn't follow this track, but let's say we have the top secret. Let's say he or she comes with a security clearance. We just don't like the way he parts his hair, or we don't like the way she dresses, or we don't like her attitude, or whatever. Do they want to maintain that? Is it your sense that they want to maintain that? Because I'm sure they're never going to say, as a way to just say, this person is not something that's going to work at this agency, and we don't have to tell you why or provide any information. We're just saying no, regardless of the fact that they're qualified.
Yes, it seems to me once DHS for a fitness examination, if they check with the intelligence community, they look in databases, JPAS for defense or Scattered Castle for the top secret SCI, they can verify that the person, when the person was given the clearance, is a person within scope for the 5 years, or if at a secret level for 10 years. This can be validated very quickly. You have a lot of trust for a person who's gone through a lot of examination repeatedly through his or her career. And with CIA, of course, you always have the added burden of going through polygraphs, which they readily are happy to give you from time to time.
Sure, sure. And as a person who's held a clearance for 30 years or so, I for the life of me, can't figure out the efficacy of this program. Mr. Pearl and Mr. Berthaw, looking at the flow of information for new hires, and I think we might do a couple rounds here because I want to ask a couple more questions. I'm going to run out of time, but I don't understand how the COR, as a DOD person, as a military guy, and understanding the functions of the contracting officer representative for DOD. What is the purpose for having them somehow injected into the personnel decisions of the would-be contractor? I've got a contract. I want to hire the person to execute the contract. And in that process, somehow it has to go to the COR and then back to me before I can proceed. What is their purpose for being there? Am I missing something, I guess is the question, because we don't want to make bad policy, but I don't understand why we're doing it that way.
Second time I forget, but by the third time I'll remember to turn the button on first. The COR's primary responsibility is actually to be the interface between the administrative contracting officer and the performing contractor in terms of making sure that the contractor is doing what they've been hired to do and that they can comply with the terms and conditions of the contract. They don't have contracting officer responsibility, but they are graded on how well the contractor does in terms of delivering on the scope of work. You can see a scenario in which a COR is worried because the contractor is not doing everything they signed up to do because they've got funded requisitions that can't be filled yet because the people assigned to fill that job are still awaiting on either their fitness determination or their security clearance, or both in some cases. So the COR has a vested interest in kind of making that happen. We've seen situations, I remember companies have told us about them in preparation for this hearing, where the COR is pinging on the contractor because they're not delivering at the same time as the COR is not necessarily pursuing, get me that answer more quickly so I can get these people to work. So you can see a way in which the two could work together. The only way in which that works better, though, is if you've got time on your side, where you've got responsiveness, and the COR, the logical thing to do would be for the adjudicating activities to be pushing the information even on a daily basis. So the COR just has to look at a checklist and say, Joe is still in process, Pete's been cleared, don't wait 7 months to tell me by email that he's ready to go, right? So that the system could actually make the COR's job easier and more effective so he or she can focus on their responsibilities with the contract.
Gentlemen, I'm way beyond my time, but I'm going to revisit that question with you a little further. But at this time, I'd like to yield my time and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and witnesses. Thank you very much for your information there. Let me get this straight. So this is Department of Homeland Security. A lot of organizations, a lot of agencies within one umbrella with the main task of protecting our country. So if you have a need, you go out and contract for personnel because you need to take care of an issue that all of us deem vital to national security. Yet it's taking a very long time to go through these vetting processes. So my question, I would open it up to all of you, is, and why does it take so long, and why is it so secretive? I mean, once you apply to go through these security clearances, is there something that DHS found that's objectionable, or it scares me to think, or is that application just gathering dust somewhere and nobody's doing anything to move that clearance ahead?
Yeah, Congressman, it does bother me greatly because the criteria used by the various operating components, except for the Transportation Security Administration, which has a very long list of potential problems in law, the component-specific criteria for a fitness examination are vague. They're not really understandable, and I thought Mr. Petro just outlined perfectly that that the opaqueness of the process leaves contractors. If you're a large-scale integrator, you can absorb maybe time and keep people waiting to go onto the contract. But for small firms, as was illustrated by one of our witnesses, you can't do that. You have to make this finding very quickly, and if you do the agency check, what they call the national agency check, other checks on the individual, you've already, and they want to put you on a contract, a resume has been submitted, it should be pretty quickly arrived at. You shouldn't have to wait days and weeks. Some people, just for fitness, now wait 3 and 4 months, and rarely is there a denial, but you have to wait for 3 or 4 months for this to occur.
So, Mr. Berteau, just following up, you came up with 3 points. This is not a trade-off, primarily, number one. It's not a trade-off of being expedient and you know, taking shortcuts here. Data analytics and access to information is there. So why can't we get through this system and move ahead. Again, are these applications just gathering dust, or somebody's actually moving ahead, or are we working with old computers that don't have access to these data analytics to move effectively forward on these applications?
In my view, you're living with a tradition and a culture. Many of these components go back decades. Customs goes back to the beginning of our country. But there's a lot of history and culture and a way of separateness. It gets to when I worked for Secretary Chertoff, his top priority was keep terrorists out of the country, keep dangerous materials out of the country, and thirdly, integrate the department.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Mr. Patel.
Mr. Correa, I think two of the dynamics that are working here. Number one is that the problem is not just for contractors. This problem also extends to government career civilians that are trying to bring in, or to uniformed personnel. And it's the same set of systems and criteria that often apply. And in cases, you will even find some of the reciprocity challenges inside DHS apply to career civilian personnel as well as to government contractors. We hire contractors for many, many reasons, and one of the reasons that we like to use contractors is because of the flexibility that contracting provides you. Once you've got a government career civil servant, that's the job they're in. With contractors, you at least theoretically have the ability to move to where the need is and to be able to go back and forth. The department is actually working against its own interests by making it more difficult to do that with the contractors that they have in place.
So my question is, why? I mean,
I don't think anybody actually wakes up with the intent.
Mr. Allen kind of alluded to that, which is the integration issue. But why? I mean, everybody has the best intentions, but
DHS alone can't fix this, of course.
So do we need to legislate
you've got
a law that says you guys got to integrate all of this? You got to talk to each other?
If I could add, Congressman, we talk about security at DHS as though it's a monolithic department that handles the security, but it's certainly not. As Mr. Allen alluded, there's security offices in each component. And so the component security offices have to submit their information to an enterprise security office that uses investigations that originate outside of the agency, typically OPM or other sources. And that all initiates when a contractor sends it to a program manager, who sends it to a core, who then sends it to a local security officer. And there's a lot of people in the chain, and I don't think it ever sits to gain dust because someone's not doing their job, but there's just a lot of handoffs where the paper can be dropped.
There are a bunch of systems that are antiquated. Case management alone, which is something that there's good technology now to manage cases. This is what companies that depend on customers do all the time. Things get lost, documents get lost. We have a number of companies that submitted examples to me where multiple forms sent in the same FedEx package, signed for by the same person. They can find some of those forms, but they can't find others of those forms. We've had examples where your example that you had of the citizenship application. I've got half the form here, but I don't have the other half of the form. These are the kinds of things that I think the individuals, I don't want to subscribe bad intent to anybody, because I don't think anybody's intending to screw this up. But when you're a bureaucrat and you're faced with, I can't find the damn forms, you're probably not going to say, the most important thing for me to do today is to call the person whose form I lost and tell them I lost the form. You're going to hope it turns up, right? And maybe it will, and maybe it won't. Mr. Allen indicated, I think, how many months, Charlie, for your last periodic reinvestigation?
For the last one conducted by Defense Security Service, 35 months. Although I continued to operate at top secret SCI level, I didn't have the validation until December the 14th of 2017.
Mine was 4 years, and they lost the electronic forms twice. Now, I thought the whole point of an electronic form is you won't lose it, right? So I had to go back and refill it out on eQuip, start all over again, and then, of course, there are a lot of things in the process that can be improved. You have to have somebody who has both the incentive, the motivation, and the authority to force those improvements to come into play.
Chair, I yield.
Chair thanks a gentleman from California. The chair now recognizes a good gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes.
Good. That was my whole goal, was to make sure that I addressed your issue, and the third time there's a charm for me, right? I apologize for that. The issue is we look at how do we be more efficient and effective in getting things done, and obviously through DHS there's lots of agencies that cut across and have somewhat related but different missions. As we're sitting here today, we're thinking that there's a lot more related in terms of how we can make that more efficient. But I just wanted to talk, maybe just ask some questions. There's a lot of things that we've talked about as problems, but maybe starting with Mr. Allen, I mean, could we boil this down to 2 or 3 top recommendations that we'd make that we would change differently, whether it's integrated systems, whether it's rules and regulations, whether it's accepting clearances that have already been done or fitness determinations that have already been done from other agencies?
Yes, if the department cannot make the decisions, then I think legislation will be required. There is really no reason, though, this decision could be made, it strikes me by the Secretary, that if a contractor, and we have thousands of them who have some level of clearances, if they have a secret or top secret clearance, they do not need a separate fitness. That's number one. You don't need a separate fitness report. There's got to be uniformity across the department. When Elaine Duke was out of government in 2015, she talked about this, and she was Undersecretary for Management when I worked with Ms. Duke, and she was terrific on this. And she talked about consistent standards. Why can't that can be done? It seems to me within the department. And reciprocity across the component. If you're a contractor, you need you're approved and you're fit to work for CBP. That's good enough for ICE. You can also work on a contract at ICE. Strikes me that these are the kinds of decisions. Those are 3 that could be done. And reciprocity. The intelligence community, to be fair, we shouldn't be too harsh on DHS, which I admire in many ways. It took a long time to get reciprocity across the intelligence agencies, and we still don't have it totally. I remember when I tried to get a NSA officer who has all the clearances in the world come down to work on a CIA contract that I was managing, I had to move heaven and earth just to get that NSA officer quickly under my management. We've come a long way in the last 15 years. I submit that DHS could come a long way with strong decision-making by the leaders of the department.
Let me just, in terms of recommendations, obviously we all focused on similar in our written testimony, but I would point out 2 things that may not require legislation. And it's an understanding, first of all, and I don't want to be here to defend DHS, but in the conversations that we've had, there is a difference between the security clearance process and a suitability and fitness process. You're looking at character, you're looking at nature of conduct, maybe a Snowden, I don't know. If some of the security clearances don't require an in-person interview. You know, you do your investigations around that. You don't see the person. And a lot of folks from DHS, in terms of how the person-to-person conduct that this agency has, different from intelligence community and different from, in some ways, the national security. That should and could play I'm not here to defend it, but it exists, and not just at DHS. The fitness and suitability standards are across. But I would look at 2 things. One is the nature of communication. Even if you have a process that is broken, even if you have a process where, where things are going on for a long time, at least communicate with the contractor. At least along the timeline, stay in touch, check in, give them that information. You don't have to give what the background that they do not part their hair. There's a thing about maybe, credit checks or how behavior at home, whatever it might be. That's number 1, communication. And number 2, I would talk about the whole nature of standardization, that there has to be a reason. Why do you need to ask that? And when we've asked the USM over the years, the last one being Rusteo, why does there need to be these various questions that are added between a CBP officer and an ICE officer? They couldn't really give us that answer. So the nature of a standardization of a sense of continuity and communication, I think, are 2 of the ones that don't need a lot of legislative action.
Mr. Chairman, may I extend, I don't know if you've got another question, but.
Oh, go ahead.
Without objection, go ahead.
I think the one single thing that's most important here is, in fact, reporting on the information. You've got 20-plus entities inside DHS that can deny reciprocity to somebody who's either suitable or has a clearance somewhere else. You really ought to require every one of those components to report on a regular basis how many reciprocity requests they get, how many did they approve, how long did it take, for those that they denied, what's the general category of denial. You don't have to give out personal information. Because I go back to something that I think Mr. Allen alluded to. If you're not good enough for one part, what makes it okay that you're still good enough for the other part? Somebody ought to actually answer that question, right? And I actually think if you take the heads of those components and you require them to submit that data to you in writing, however periodically you want to get it, once a year, every 6 months, whatever, by the second time around, they're going to want to show something better than the set of data that was in the first time around. That's the single most important thing I think you could do to draw attention to this issue and prevent anybody from hiding behind, I just lost it and I don't want to go look for it.
Thank you. I've exceeded my time, but I appreciate your answers and help us with that. So I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Kansas and now turns to Mr. Higgins from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for appearing before us today. I have 3 questions or 3 areas I'd like to address, so I'll get to them quickly. One, we've discussed the lack of coordinated effort essentially within the DHS and its component agencies, both for fitness determinations, which is for contractors, and for suitability determinations for employees. And the overriding message we're receiving today, and my own research confirms this, is the redundancy within the system that we have referred to. So I ask you, gentlemen, because no one has mentioned, you're all, I'm quite sure, familiar with the Department of Homeland Security Authorization Act of 2017. That was passed last year, in July of last year, July 20th of last year. This body passed the Department of Homeland Security Authorization Act 386-41. The first paragraph of the summary of that bill, the bill amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002. It's an agency that was never authorized, which meant it was spread across 8 or 9 committees for oversight. Now, how can we have an organized effort within a massive organization of this nature with many components without centralized command and control? And does that not begin with this body's responsibility to authorize that department? So I bring you to this first paragraph. The bill amends the Homeland Security Act of 2002 to establish in the Department of Homeland Security a headquarters which shall, among other things, establish an overall strategy to successfully further the mission of DHS and to ensure that DHS successfully meets operational and management performance objectives. I would say this entire subcommittee hearing has pointed out the fact that DHS has not successfully met operational and management performance objectives. And yet, the bill that was passed by this body through this committee as a whole in the summer of 2017 languishes in the Senate. So I would hope that my Senate colleagues are listening, and I hope that your organizations are communicating with our colleagues across the way. Regarding redundancy, I'll completely concur, and I'll just ask you gentlemen, do you believe that the full authorization of the Homeland Security in all of its components, the agency, that the full authorization passed through the Senate, signed by the President, would this help us address some of these lack of controlled efforts as a centralized effort within the agency? Mr. Allen?
Yes, I'd just like, yes, thank you, Congressman, for the questions on the whole problem of a number of committees and subcommittees to which DHS has to report. It's 88 or so, or 90. That's 105. We struggled under Secretary Chertoff, and I know Governor Ridge did before I came to the department. We struggled, and we found ourselves meeting with many subcommittees across the Senate and the House of Representatives in ways that did not further. But until we have a more centralized command and control and oversight by the Congress, we want that oversight, and we want intense oversight.
Thank you for
That's
that
the
answer,
reason we
sir.
established a Homeland Security Committee.
May allow Mr. Pearl,
Yes.
yes or no, sir?
Well, this subcommittee is not just the oversight, and that's I think the nature of the vision. It's oversight and management efficiency. Now, does that exist? Do your colleagues hear that in the House? Was it completely addressed in the Authorization Act? It was not. The nature of what industry, which has so many detailees and so many contractors, that relationship between industry and government, much different, the relationship is different, has not been fully addressed in the way that we can. Yes, my answer to you is
would you not agree, though, that that authorization is a first step towards centralized command and control?
Absolutely, but nothing that we have said
Berto?
here today, Mr. Higgins, would in fact impede and be impeded by the passage of an authorization bill, though it's needed. What we're talking about are standards and procedures that are cut across the entire federal government space, and without the calcification that DHS has as an adult, 15-year-old
And Mr. Allen
adolescent.
referred
Can they do it?
to the culture, but the primary problem here we're discussing today is redundancy in its application towards fitness determination or suitability. Mr. Berto, yes or no?
Mr. Higgins, I would note that it took the Department of Defense 39 years between the passage of the National Security Act of 1947 and the passage of the Goldwater-Nichols Defense Reform Act of 1986 to consolidate the authority, direction, and control of the department in the hand of the Secretary of Defense. I would hope that it doesn't take the Department of Homeland Security that long. I think this authorization bill makes some steps in the right direction there.
Well stated, sir, and your mic was on. Mr. Labonte?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if it solves the problem, but I think centralizing through the Authorization Act would only help. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen, and with your indulgence and without further objection, I'd like to go for a second round. If you're interested in sticking around, fine. If you're not, so I'm going to take another 5 minutes here. Let me start out with Mr. Labonte. First of all, are you of the family that does all that race car driving in NASCAR?
I'm still trying to find a connection.
All right, because some people complain about that dirty drive. No, that's not fair. So for people that might not be familiar, that might be watching this saying, what the heck's going on at DHS? Just as an employer, right? You have some contracts. Walk me through the process of you think you've got a contract and you're trying to hire somebody and you're waiting for them to get their fitness adjudication. So you've got a person, you submit for that. Where does that person go? What are you doing? How long is it taking? How much is it costing you, which is essentially costing us? Because you, I'm sure, plan for that in the contract price when you bid. And I'd just like to know maybe how do you even calculate that at this point?
Yeah, we've figured out that on average, we've taken our contracts as we bid them. They're often 3-year, 4-year, 5-year contracts. And instead of bidding at full staff at the beginning, we actually assume it's going to take at least 6 months to get to full staffing levels, because we never are able to ramp up through the fitness process. You know, to walk you through the process, there's a couple different pieces, but to simplify, we'll make an offer to a potential employee. We'll recruit them. We'll spend the money on a recruiter. We'll spend the money on advertising. We'll find them. We'll spend time and overhead interviewing these people, trying to find out if they're the right person for the job. We'll bring them in and screen them with a number of different sources. We like the person, we make them an offer, and it's contingent on them receiving a positive fitness determination from the government. They are then asked to fill out the EQIP form that I think you're probably all familiar with, outlining their background. We review that, and it goes into our core on our contract. The Corps looks at it, but I'll be honest, the Corps is not trained, generally speaking, in personnel security issues. That's not really their job. And so they end up just sort of forwarding the information into the local security office for the component. It may sit there for a very long time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It then gets forwarded to PSD. PST will either initiate an investigation or try to grab an investigation that's been done recently and make their evaluation. All of this process takes months. We lose about 1 of every 3 candidates waiting on the fitness process.
What are they doing while they're waiting? What are they doing?
So we haven't employed
You're not
them.
paying. Are you
I can't.
paying them?
I can't hire
You're
them.
not paying
No, I
them,
can't.
right?
I can't because if I hired them, I can't bill them on the contract. So they'd have to sit on overhead. That would put my
So they got a job, but they don't have any pay, and they don't know when they're going to start the job. So just like everybody else, they have bills to pay, lives to live, and they move on.
Not only that, so that's all true, and not only that, but they ask us for information on the process,
And you can't,
and I can't tell them anything.
because you don't get it.
I'm not allowed to get it. If I call DHS and say I've got an employee who's been in fitness for 6 months and I need some information, they will say, we will not speak to you, talk to your core.
All right, that'll be for round 3 for me. So let me.
You're getting me a little...
Yeah, right. No, me too. But I just want to. So let me ask you this: because I think Mr. Higgins, Representative Higgins, touched on a very important part, which is the authorization of this agency, which is fraught with its own perils, and of course it sits in the Senate. But let me ask you this: we have a secretary, and while it may have taken DOD decades to bring all those forces together, it seems to me, and I guess my question to you folks, you smart people, is there any reason in the absence of an authorization, right, as it sits in the Senate and waits for a presidential signature, assuming it gets past the Senate, is there any reason that the secretary can't just wave her wand, so to speak, and make it so?
I think that's partially a question for the secretary. From my perspective, DOD does this pretty well, and it may have taken a long time to get there, but they've figured out how to do it. They've figured out how to engage industry and work back and forth.
So what I'm reluctant to do as a legislator personally, and I can't speak for anybody else on the dais here, but is to legislate this when it seems to me this is a management/leadership function. We have a secretary. Look at these problems. Okay, you're using suitability and fitness when it seems to me for the most part security clearance fixes that. Contractors operating, the COR is involved in this process, probably shouldn't be. I don't see any reason for them to be, but maybe I'm missing something. So move the contracting representative at the end to manage the project and let these other folks at the OPM and the people managing the individual agency at DHS decide who they want to hire based on whatever criteria and cut half this overhead and redundancy out. And then, oh, by the way, report on the progress to people that call. This guy's a loser. We're not taking him. This lady's great. You can expect her to be approved in 3 weeks or a month. Like that seems like to me something a secretary can do. And if it's, so, I'm asking you: is there any reason that you know of that the secretary can't do what I just described?
So I don't know of any reason, but I sat across from PSD and I asked a question that was similar to that of the director of personnel security. I said, why can't you utilize the folks who are already deputized by DOD to help you get this clearance done? And the answer was, we don't have a statutory way to engage folks. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't
That's
know
a
that.
question for us to ask.
Yeah.
Without my time.
I think that's a good question, Mr. Chairman. I do believe, for example, the Secretary of Homeland Security certainly has the power to further empower and authorize the Chief Security Officer of the department to centralize and organize and structure and give direction so that we're not broken up into little parcels of security as we are today.
Mr. Chairman, may
Gentleman, correction, Chairman recognizes Mr. Correa.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the chairman's line of questioning, which is Secretary of DHS, does the secretary have a magic wand, or do we need legislation to move this forward? And as I look at all of you here, you're going to give me an answer, but I guess the person we've got to ask is the Secretary of DHS. What is it exactly that you need to implement these, policies of efficiency?
Mr. Correa, from my perspective, there are no statutory or, for that matter, regulatory impediments to the Secretary undertaking to do that. But I think it's important to recognize that many aspects of this problem are not under the Department of Homeland Security's control. If you look at, and I think the fitness determinations are largely entirely under their control unless they determine that there's a point at which they have to hand off part of the background investigation to the Office of Personnel Management National Background Investigation Bureau to undertake additional inquiries on that regard. At that point, it goes into the hopper with all the rest of the federal government, so it's now competing for limited resources with a host of other activities.
So I guess you're
think,
telling
though,
me
that
something that might happen. So I guess the question is, what percentage of those actually get to be handed off and which
Well,
don't?
and that's part of my point of why I come back to, I think the single most important thing you can do is to both reinforce the positive behavior from the secretary and expose those places where maybe there's a little foot dragging going on by requiring regular updates from them over all of the details and the data that come out of that. How many have been handed off to NBIB for further background investigation? What's the status of those? So that you actually, I think, through your oversight can reinforce the positive things that the secretary can do, help steer the opportunities towards those positive things, and perhaps create a little disincentive for ignoring the problem.
I would
Allen,
just
go ahead.
add the context of measurements and data. We don't have it. The companies don't have it in terms of why decisions are made or how long, what are the delaying challenges. You don't have it, and I think that, and the secretary doesn't have it either, because each of the components, forget about everybody else, the head of the components will argue and have argued to us and in your AIR that you were involved in why they need to be different, why TSA needs to be different from CBP, from ICE, from Secret Service, et cetera. We have other character issues and personal issues where we need, I'm glad that you have a security clearance. That's great. You need it before we can even go to fitness. But the fact is that we have other aspects because the interaction with the public or whatever excuses they give. And I think that if you can get the kind of measurements, the kind of reporting back between you and DHS, that would go a long way to encouraging why a company, and Mr. Labante's examples, are not by themselves, are not a silo. They exist throughout the entire contracting community that are trying to do business to the best of their ability with DHS.
I think, Mr. Correa, I think that one thing we have to do is, or that you will have to do, is to repeal the TSA standards, which are in law, because if you're going to encourage reciprocity across all of it, it should be a common standards, and there should be common reciprocity. As long as it stands out by itself, it really is an impediment.
If I may add, Mr. Congressman, you asked the question, is there a reason the secretary can't wave a wand and change it, or the question was asked. I will say that in the last 10 years that I've been doing this process has gotten progressively worse. And it's also changed. It's changed, I think, absent those authorizing bills and whatnot over time. And so if it could get worse over time, it would seem like it could get better as well with management action inside the organization.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say, using the oversight of this committee, I think we do have to have the DHS come in here and testify and try to figure out, does she need a better wand? The secretary need a better wand, or do we, come up with some good legislative solutions here? But more importantly, the ongoing oversight to make sure that things move in the right direction. Mr. Labonte, you were saying things got worse. Well, let's see if we can get them to get better. Again, no trade-offs. It's just becoming more efficient for the sake of our national security. I yield, sir.
Chair thanks the gentleman from California. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Labonte, how large is your
About 150 people, sir.
150 people? Have they all contracted? What percentage of them has contracted before with DHS and been through fitness determination, suitability?
We're about 85% Homeland Security, sir.
Okay. So if you are going through the vetting process for a new contract, those employees have to get vetted completely all over again in the same manner?
Yes, sir. In fact, if employees who are sitting at a desk at one of DHS's facilities change contracts without a new contract, without a real change, if they move, we've got an office where we have 4 contracts and the people sit in the same room, they collaborate together daily. If they end up changing from one contract to the other, they are required to go through fitness again.
Yeah, you gentlemen today have been describing the colossal inefficiency of the federal government, and it devours the people's treasure, and we're duty bound and sworn by oath to address it and fix it. And I tell you, there's a great deal of IQ sitting at that table, and you've all shared very similar testimonies this day. You seem to be focused on inconsistency and redundancy I turn to Mr. Allen's written testimony. He stated fitness standards across DHS components precluding reciprocity of favorable suitability assessments when a contractor joins a contract with a different DHS component. And you've experienced this, Mr. Labonte?
Yes, sir.
And redundancy is tied into the inconsistency. So it seems to me that this is a executive fix, and I can't understand. I recognize the various components, and that seems to tie into what Mr. Allen has stated regarding culture. But I'd refer to my colleague's question, and I'd just like to repeat it. Is there any reason that you gentlemen can see that within the authority and the infrastructure of the executive that this could not be addressed at secretary level?
My view, Mr. Higgins, is that a great deal of this could be addressed by executive decision by the leadership of DHS. Working with the Tom Bossert over at the White House, a lot could be done to improve this significantly and right away.
Mr. Pearl?
Well, I don't want to wipe away the fitness standards, but we want them standardized. We want to understand a sense of consistency. A couple of examples. Drugs is one example. Some agencies don't care. Some agencies may say within the last 3 years, within the last 10 years. That's not necessarily just a security clearance uniform approach. So different components approach that question. They approach bad debt differently. Some don't even allow the asking of the question. Some set it at 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000. All they have to do is justify it to the secretary. They have to, in essence, say, this is why we have found that when you're a Border Patrol agent, you know, and we need more.
But if there was a comprehensive effort and study within the executive, then these things could be addressed and standardized.
Absolutely. Then that's all that we have really been asking for.
Mr.
We've been
Berto?
asking for that.
Here's where I think leadership comes into play. In the end, this process of making a determination of whether somebody is suitable, whether somebody is fit, whether somebody earns the trust of the government to have a clearance is a judgment call, right? If you could automate this, if you could just make it a checklist and automate it, it'd be very easy to do that. In the end, judgment implies some level of acceptance of risk because you're not going to be right 100.0% of the time. So I think where the leadership comes into play is not only giving the guidance, reporting the data, but given the coverage that says it's okay to use judgment in a way that doesn't, you minimize risk by taking forever to do it. If you never say yes, then you're never in trouble for having said yes to the wrong person. The secretary and the officials underneath the secretary need to provide the coverage that says it's okay to make a decision. What you see all too often is maybe there's something suspicious out here. Well, maybe if we sit on it a while, the guy will quit. And he'll withdraw his name, and then you need to finish that.
Excellent point.
Let him exercise that risk in a way, because ultimately it's where is the government putting its trust. That's an important decision, but it's not one that should take forever.
Mr. Labonte, close us out here, sir.
I would completely agree. I think there's a lot that can be done within the management of the organization. I mentioned that we can't communicate with DHS about our employees' status. That has not always been the case. That changed in 2016. And as best we can tell, it was just an internal decision to make a change. And so if they could have changed it to be more restrictive in communication, they can change it to be more transparent with the employers. There's a lot that could be done.
Gentlemen, this has been a very enlightening testimony. We very much appreciate your participation. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. Just a couple final questions before we close up here. I'm just trying to determine, because I feel like I'm missing something. They get a big agency that wants to do the right thing, get great people there, but somehow the wrong thing seems to happen more in this case than the right thing. What is the reason for the secrecy? Why can't they talk to you about where your proposed employee/contractor is in the pipe? Is there some reason? Is there some reason we don't know? Is there something that you know? Is there some national security thing that we haven't considered? What's happening here?
It gets back, Mr. Chairman, to privacy. They don't like to, if there's derogatory information and they're evaluating and adjudicating whether the person is fit or not. I think attorneys and others have made it the inability to communicate well with.
But other agencies don't have the same problem, do they?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
They do?
The Central Intelligence Agency is very
How about
is very
DOD?
good in saying.
There's a lot of contractors in DOD. How about DOD?
They communicate. They have points of contact.
So if somebody can do it, everybody can do it. You got to want to do it, though.
You
have
got
to have a
to
system
want
in
to
place.
do it. You've got to have, and they've got to have the authority to say, things are on track, please hold on, and we'll give you the security clearance.
Let me just say, I think that that's why the standardization is important. Because if you do not know what the rules are, you make up your own rules.
Sure.
And because there is a culture of risk aversion, particularly at DHS and, you know, and whether it's the intel community or DOD, but there is right now that culture of risk aversion. And if I'm not given the standards and the rules by which I communicate, I'm going to avoid it entirely. I'm afraid that if I don't give the right information out, I tell the contractor personal identifiable information about a particular person, which I'm really not allowed to give, and the general counsel's office says—
Wait a minute. Doesn't the contractor who's hired so-and-so have some reasonable expectation to know about the employee that he just hired that filled out the SF-86?
Yes.
So what information is the government going to give him that he doesn't already know unless the prospective employee lied on the form, right? And so you could just say, look, the form doesn't match up, doesn't comport with reality. Is that enough information for you? I think we'd get that and we could move on, right? Okay, let me ask you something else here. I understand you want to keep the suitability fitness thing. I'm not sure because I don't know of other agencies that do that. But, Mr. Allen, you mentioned the TSA minimum standard. That's in statute, and that might be a hindrance to
I think it is a hindrance because it puts such excruciating detail for TSA standards that it does inhibit, I think, other components from reaching common standards.
Do any of the other agencies, such as the Secret Service or Immigration, ICE, or do any of the other agencies have a lesser standard than that?
No, I would say
so
not.
It could be a minimum standard at a minimum, right?
I think there should be common standards, and I think they can be agreed upon with the proper leadership of DHS.
Seems to me you could use the security clearance requirement plus, right, for suitability, because I agree with you. If you're not going to conducting an interview, you might miss some things. So security clearance plus 10 questions or this criteria, and then move on.
It should be very efficient and very quick.
All right. I think we beat this horse. I think it's dead, but anyhow.
Oh, no, it's nowhere near dead.
Well, I guess the beating will continue from here. I think me and the fine folks on the committee and the wonderful staff here will try and figure out what the way forward is here with your input as well. Did you have something
Mr. Chairman, if you indulge me, I have just one question left very quickly. We were talking about non-legislative recommendations. We touched upon legislative recommendations in terms of the TSA minimum. Any other thoughts on legislative recommendations?
Mr. Correa, I think the one thing that's critical here, you know, we're operating right now under continuing resolution inside the executive branch. That continuing resolution goes on until March 23rd. Presumably, eventually, the appropriators are going to write the appropriations that will do this. I would urge this committee to pay close attention and make sure that the resources necessary to execute this mission and function inside DHS are included in those appropriations. We'll be glad to help you pay attention to those and weigh in where appropriate on there.
Please feel free.
Sir, you mentioned having sufficient resources. If we streamline this thing and introduce efficiencies, won't we devour less of the people's treasure and do a better job?
I think that's absolutely the case.
Absolutely.
But I don't think we'll streamline it by March 24th. I think we're going to
agree
need some funding
completely.
to get through this year.
We have to fix what's broken within this body and the appropriations process and budgeting process, no doubt. But if we can develop standards and processes within the DHS and its various components that are reflective of best standards in private industry and efficient management, would the entire Department of Homeland Security not run more efficiently?
It would entirely cost you less. That false dichotomy that I laid out between speed and security, it's also a false dichotomy between speed and cost.
Thank you, sir.
Correct.
The Chair thanks the witnesses for their really valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7 Delta, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.